Hello, good evening. Welcome to Iffgd's 2020 virtual advocacy event. Thank you for joining us this evening as we continue our advocacy event for 2021 and talking more about advocacy. If you were with us yesterday, we learned a lot about different ways that you can find support for yourself or your loved one with gastrointestinal illness. We talked about online support groups, in-person support groups, virtual support groups through social media, and then some support services that are completely out of the box and amazing, like air flight or food banks and integrative care resources. Those types of things are fabulous ways that you can advocate for yourself by finding these support services for you, whether it be a support group or something else, in order to help you to manage daily with your gastrointestinal illness, something each of us has to think about. However, if you talk to the average person and you mention the word advocacy, they think about, well, going to Washington. And they think about talking to congressional offices, and that is extremely important. Honestly, it's the bottom line of why we are even having this week. This advocacy event is about making change, not only through Washington, but advocating for ourselves as well. So while yesterday we spent a good bit of time talking about how to find those resources, today we're going to talk specifically about Washington. We're going to talk about legislative issues for the gastrointestinal illness community. We're going to talk about how to contact your congressman, what should you be thinking about, what should you be telling them, and helping you in every way we can to make that contact easier. Now, if you are planning to contact your congressional office, and I hope that you are, please contact us at advocacy@iffgd.org. We can help you through the process, or just let us know that you've done it so we can follow up with those congressional offices in a week or so and say, hey, your constituent called you. We'd like to talk to you about it. That will help us to gain strides in this fight that we have to get more awareness and advocacy efforts across the finish line in Washington. But before we really talk about how to do it and who to call and all of those things, we want to take a step back. And with us today, you're going to have interviews from myself and also Marissa Lombardi, who you met yesterday, our program coordinator, and also Philip Goglis. Philip is the IFFGD's Washington representative and handles all of our legislative issues, our advocacy meetings, and he helps us, guides us in this maze of Washington that we find ourselves in. And there are several talks from Philip this evening that you're going to hear. As a matter of fact, the very first one on the agenda is Philip talking about how Congress works. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of contacting your congressman or what the issues are, we're going to let Philip tell us just a little bit about the big picture of Washington and Congress and why it's important to do it to begin with.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today at IFFGD's 2021 Virtual Advocacy event. Today, we are focusing on advocacy, ensuring that advocates have all the tools and answers they need to successfully contact Congress. And with us today is IFFGD's Washington Representative Philip Goglis II to discuss more about how Congress works. Thank you for being with us today, Philip.
Thank you, Marissa. Glad to be here.
And before we go into detail about how advocates can contact Congress, I would like to briefly mention that Congress is made up of two branches, the Senate and the House of Representatives. Each person has two senators that represent the entire state. And for the House of Representatives, each state has a number of representatives that is based on their population. And as you can see in an earlier video with Philip, he went into how Congress works and really went into more detail about why there is this range of representatives and how states can range from one representative to over 50. And the members of the House of Representatives have a specific district in each state or the entire state that they represent. So each person has one representative. So again, that's two senators for each person and one representative in their state. And to go into more detail about contacting, Philip, how can advocates locate their senators if they are not familiar with them?
Thanks, Marissa. And I greatly appreciate being with you again and seeing everybody who is participating in our virtual advocacy event. So thank you all. It's very straightforward in how to locate your senators if you're not familiar with them. The easiest way is to go to www.senate.gov. There on the left side, you'll be able to see a drop-down menu that is Find Your Senators. From there, all you have to do is locate your state, and it'll list both of your senators there. It will have links to their websites where you can click and explore and find out who your two senators are.
Wonderful, thank you. And once advocates are able to locate their senators, what is the best way for them to contact their senator? And especially if it is their first time reaching out to that congressperson.
So once you've located the websites of your two senators, the websites are generally very user-friendly. They have different tabs where you can learn more about your senator. If they're new, given that we're in a new Congress, there are some new members of the Senate. Or if you're not familiar with your senator, you can go see a little bit more about them, see what committees they serve on, some other information that's helpful for their constituents. But they also have a contact page. And on that contact page, you'll be able to see where their Washington, D.C. office is located, as well as a list of offices they have throughout the state. So we encourage everybody to find that office location that's closest to you, so that way you're able to connect with your local office. You know, for instance, if you're living in New York and you live on Long Island and you want to contact Senator Schumer's office, you would go to his website, you would look at his contact page, and you would find the office that's closest to you. With a state like New York, you know, Senator Schumer will have offices in Buffalo or Rochester, New York City, Albany. But if you're on Long Island, you'll look for the one that's closest to you. And they have the contact information there that you can reach out and connect with them. It all depends on the state. Some states have one or two, some have quite a few local offices, but it all depends on the size of the state.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that brief overview of how to contact senators. And now that viewers are more familiar with how to reach their senator and locate them, how can advocates locate their member from the House of Representatives?
Sure. So it's a very similar process. Instead of senate.gov, for your House member, you're going to go to www.house.gov. There, they're going to ask you for your zip code. You put in your zip code, and then it will guide you to who your representative is. Because districts are drawn in specific shapes and figures, you may be required to put in your full address, because there are some instances across the country where, you know, Marissa and I, if we're neighbors in the same zip code, we might have two different representatives just because how the districts are drawn. So you'll want to put in your full address there with your street, your town, your zip code again, and it'll give you specifically who your member of Congress is. Again, the same way you found your senators, click on the link to your House member's website. It'll take you there. You'll again be able to see a little bit more about them, what committees they serve on. There are a lot of new House members, so if you aren't familiar with who your member of the House is, you know, feel free to explore their website to find out a little bit more about them. Again, they'll have a contact page where they'll show you their DC office, the contact information for there, as well as local offices. And again, it varies depending on where your district is, how many local offices there are. I know some members who only have one district office because their districts are rather compact and smaller. But then you have others who represent the entire state, such as Montana or the Dakotas or Delaware. So those members of the House often have quite a few local offices depending on location. So we ask you to find the office that's closest to you, give them a call, connect with their staff locally, and then ask to meet with or ask to speak with somebody who handles healthcare related issues, so that way you can begin to develop that relationship with them.
Thank you so much for that overview. And I'm glad you touched on as well to contact their representative, that they should reach out to that local office and get that local connection that is closest to them and would be the best, easiest method of contact to really start a relationship with their representative?
Yes, so we greatly encourage everybody to call the office that's closest to you to engage with their staff. Most offices have other ways to contact them, but we strongly encourage you to call them so that way you can start to develop key relationships. Our advocacy efforts have been successful over the years because of the personal relationships our advocates have developed, and that's through working with the local office, sharing information with them, and then following up with them throughout the year.
Yes, that is absolutely true that the communication and the relationship you build with senators and representatives really helps to improve and push advocacy efforts. And if advocates prefer to share their legislative needs just over the phone, is it still important for them to also communicate via email, or can they rely on communicating with just one method or the other?
So we always like to have our advocates do whatever they feel most comfortable with. I know some folks would rather send an email. Some are more comfortable speaking to a live person on the other end. Um, we want you to do what's best for you, but we strongly encourage communication via email, as well as a follow-up to a personal conversation you might have. This also presents us with the opportunity to share some specific follow-up information and materials to offices via email. And we at IFFGD are very happy to help you follow up. All we ask you to do is to email us at advocacy@iffgd.org or call us at 414-946-1799. Give us your name, the name of your representative, who you spoke with, and their email if you have it, and then we can work with you on that follow-up. But we strongly encourage you, as part of developing that relationship, to speak with somebody and get their contact information. So that way, throughout the year, as different our priorities are introduced or working their way through the legislative process, you can follow up with them. If it's something about patient access that happens in July, you can follow up and say, "Hi, it's Phil again. We spoke earlier this year, and I just wanted to circle back with you on this specific bill that is being introduced, and this is why either it will greatly benefit our community or this is why the bill would not benefit our community." But it's a good natural way for follow-up for us with our members in developing that relationship.
Thank you so much for telling us a little bit more about the importance of that communication. And are there any other ways for advocates to reach out and contact their Congress members?
Absolutely. We are in a world of social media, so I encourage folks to, if you're on Facebook, Twitter, follow your members of Congress there. They will be able to share updates on some of the virtual town halls they're having. They will share some events that are happening in the district. Of course, we ask you in your interactions with them to keep things very civil and respectful and germane to the issues that affect our patient communities, with specifically our requests. They're also on members' websites, different ways where you can connect with them as well. They have different contact forms where you're able to put in your information, share some of your thoughts with them, and then receive feedback from them about about the things you asked from them. That is, of course, on the website, and they also have other ways that they have available for you to contact with them, as well as having, again, the addresses for their DC and local offices. Once we are through the current pandemic and we can get back to seeing each other in person again, we strongly encourage local visits to the local office, so that way, again, you can solidify and continue to develop and grow the relationships with the local office and then the DC staffers as well.
So great for advocates to be aware of the wide opportunity to be able to contact and the many ways that they can connect and stay engaged with their representatives. And as you said earlier, please email advocacy@iffgd.org or give us a call at 414-946-1799 with any additional questions or concerns that you may have with contacting your legislators, or if you may need any assistance in your advocacy efforts. And thank you all for taking the time to watch this video today. And thank you, Philip, for sharing with us this important information about how Congress works and how to contact your legislators in Congress. You can watch more of IFFGD's 2021 virtual advocacy event on the IFFGD webpage.
Thank you, Marissa, and thank you all again, and look forward to your feedback and successful engagement with Congress.
Hello, thank you for being with us today for IFFGD's 2020 advocacy event. I do apologize for a little technical mix-up there. You just listened to Philip Goglis and Marissa Lombardi talk about how to contact your congressional offices, and that is what we are talking about today. We are talking about contacting your congressional offices. Thank you, Amber, for pointing out the importance of developing that local contact, just as Philip had mentioned in his talk. It is fantastic. If you contact your congressional local office, not the one in Washington, but the one right there in your state, sometimes they will have someone that you can meet with regularly. And I know that we have several advocates that are able to, when new issues arise, contact that same person directly and say, oh, there's something new I want the office to think about, or new bill I want you to consider or to look at the wording of. And so it's great to develop those local connections. Thank you, Amber, for pointing that out. Good for all of us to know. I do want you to know we are going to start back with how Congress works and have Philip explain that to us now that we know how to contact our offices. And if you missed that video because you signed on a little bit late, that's okay. These videos are going to be available on our website at iffgd.org so that you will be able to watch these videos later. Or if you were trying to scramble and take notes and just couldn't quite get them all there, that's okay too. Watch the video again and be able to see and rehear those things. And if you have any questions whatsoever, please do not hesitate to contact us. You can email us at our general email address, which is iffgd@iffgd.org. Or to reach directly to our advocacy office, it is advocacy@iffgd.org. Either way, we have people that will be able to respond to you, answer your questions, forward your questions, and make sure that we are there to help you and support you along this journey of advocacy. So now we're going to listen to Philip as he talked to us about the big picture of Congress and how it works so that we can get a better understanding of why we even bother talking to them in the first place.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today at IFFGD's 2021 virtual advocacy event. Today, we are focusing on advocacy, ensuring that advocates have all the tools and answers they need to successfully contact Congress. And with us today is IFFGD's Washington Representative Philip Goglis II to discuss more about how Congress works. Thank you for being with us today, Philip.
Thanks, Marissa. Glad to be here.
Can you start by giving us a brief overview of the general structure of the United States government?
Sure thing. And thank you again for having me. It's good to be with you today. And hello to everybody who is joining us and participating in our virtual advocacy event this year. It's greatly appreciated that you are getting involved. So Marissa, the structure of the US government is broken down into three different branches. You have the executive branch, which is the president and the administration. They enforce the laws. You have the judiciary branch, which on the federal level is made up of the Supreme Court and federal courts. They interpret laws. And then you have the legislative branch, which is Congress. And that's where we do a lot of our work with advocacy and engagement. And we do that because Congress has the power to create laws. They draft specific policy recommendations. They draft different laws and priorities, and they have oversight over federal agencies. So it's always good for us to be engaged with them because they're the ones who decide what policies get passed and also how much money gets spent around the federal government.
Thank you. That was such a great general overview of the United States government. And of course, if anyone has any further questions, you can feel free to include those in the chat, as we will be doing a Q&A at the end of this presentation. And you mentioned that specifically we are working with and contacting Congress in our advocacy efforts. Can you tell viewers a little bit more about how Congress itself is organized?
Sure. So Congress is broken up into two different houses. You have the House of Representatives and the Senate. The Senate is composed of 100 members, 2 from each state. So it doesn't matter if you live in a high population state like California or a low population state like Montana or Delaware, you have the same number of senators, which is 2. On the House side, you have 1 member from each district, and there are 435 members of the House. That's where population matters. You have states like California, which are high population, that have 53, I believe, individual House offices. States like Florida have 25 because of the large, or 27 because of the large number of population there, as opposed to smaller states like Delaware or Montana or the Dakotas, where they only have 1 member of the House. And those districts get rearranged every 10 years based off of the census and population. So we're really at an interesting time, because some of the districts that are currently configured are going to be redone before the next Congress. So we're definitely going to see some additions and subtractions based off of population. Members of the House are elected every 2 years, so they don't have the luxury of the Senate, who are elected for 6 years. So every 2 years, the whole House, all 435 seats, are up for election, while on the Senate side, only about roughly a third are up every 2 years. So the Senate is a little more nuanced, and they have longer time periods because they serve 6 years as opposed to just 2 years on the House side.
Great, thank you so much for telling us about that. And I know that within Congress, there are different committees. So can you tell us a little bit about the committees and why they are so important, especially in advocacy efforts?
Sure thing. So as I mentioned, why we deal with Congress is because they have unique authority to create and draft specific policies. They have the ability of, and they have the responsibility of oversight for federal agencies, but they also have control over the purse strings. So they're the ones who decide how much money is spent at different federal agencies, how much money the National Institutes of Health receives, how much money the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention receives, with as well as specific recommendations on how to spend some of that money. So within that framework, we have different congressional committees of jurisdiction that we work with. On the House and Senate side, both have appropriation committees, which they are the ones who decide how much money is spent across different federal agencies. On the Senate side, you have the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. That's a committee of jurisdiction that has oversight over federal health agencies, as well as other programs. They work with the Department of Education, they work with HHS, across all of their different areas as well. And it's because they have that oversight of that committee that we work very closely with them, because they also help implement some specific policies for federal agencies and for our communities. On the Senate side, you also have the Finance Committee, which deals with Medicare and Medicaid policies and general tax provisions as well. So they have a very important role in deciding specific healthcare policies as well, working with the Help Committee with jurisdiction and oversight. On the House side, you have the Energy and Commerce Committee, which is the complement to the Senate Help Committee. They're the committee of jurisdiction with oversight over the National Institutes of Health, over the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, FDA, and other federal agencies. You then have the Ways and Means Committee, which is the complement to the Finance Committee. They oversee Medicare, Medicaid, as well as some tax issues. So we specifically work with those 6 committees because those decisions that they make have a great bearing on different things for our community. Appropriations, how much money is spent on research or for public education and awareness programs. Help and Energy and Commerce, Finance, and Ways and Means over specific policies and implementations. The Affordable Care Act worked its way through all of those committees, for example. Issues on patient access works its way through those committees as well. So those are the committees with health policy oversight, and they advance those specific priorities, while appropriation covers the specific amount of money that's spent at each federal agency.
Thank you so much for that great overview. And it's wonderful to know that Congress is so heavily organized and that there are specific committees, specific representatives that really have more of a say within certain parts of advocacy so that we can really target our advocacy efforts and know where we'll make the most impact.
Right, that's definitely true. It does help us to be very strategic in our advocacy efforts, who serves on relevant committees and who's able to really make a difference. Now, that's not to say that advocating with every senator or every House member is not important, because how these members of these committees make decisions is based off of feedback from their colleagues as well. So we work very importantly on creating the National Grassroots Advocacy Network, where we have folks from all across the country engaging with their members. But at the same time, we also have some of these strategic relationships that help us advance some of our specific priorities.
That is such a great point that any advocacy efforts are important, as you said. These representatives and senators speak with each other and help each other make decisions. So even if you're advocating to someone who isn't specifically involved in a committee, their opinion may have a big impact on other committee members when they discuss and talk about the different policies and advocacy needs. And in addition to our advocacy efforts, talking to the different committees and the representatives, we often ask, and we ourselves as advocates speak to members of Congress about the activities of different federal agencies. And I know you briefly touched on that when you talked about where the committees have their different jurisdictions and what they work with and work in. Why is it so important to talk about these federal agencies with Congress members?
So it's critically important because of the two roles that the House and the Senate serve, specifically, again, those 6 committees that we've talked about. Appropriators who serve on that Appropriations Committee have the distinct power to decide how much money a federal agency receives. Because of that, federal agencies are always very responsive to the desires, the needs, the questions of members of the Appropriations Committee, because they're the ones who decide how much money is afforded or available for research or for different things. Because they have the power of the purse, it gives them, Congress, the ability to influence some of the process and to make specific recommendations for federal agencies. They will allocate a certain amount of funding and will sometimes say, we encourage you to use this funding to do a little more research or to do a little more work in this area. And then the other committees, such as Energy and Commerce, Health, Ways and Means, and Finance, they're critically important because, as we are seeing now with the new administration, there are these different nominees for different important roles within federal agencies. And on the Senate side, all of these nominees have to go through confirmation hearings where they sit in front of the committees of jurisdiction. For example, the nominee for Secretary of Health and Human Services is going to be going in front of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, where he'll answer questions from committee members about what his vision is for the agency, how to respond to the current pandemic, and what he believes the role of his agency is. That's important because now that committee will continue to follow up with the nominee about different decisions that he makes if he is confirmed, and then follow up with some specific recommendations. So the reason why we engage with these committees is to really serve as a check on the federal agencies, make sure that the things that we are discussing with our members of Congress, the federal agencies are following the guidance. If we're asking for increased funds or if we're making specific recommendations about how to move forward. One example, and I know that this will get more into this a little later on. One of our requests is for the CDC's Chronic Disease Education and Awareness Program. And what's important about that is Congress will provide the funding for that, but they also want to make sure that the federal agency positively responds to what their recommendations are. So the agencies rely on Congress for the funding, as well as some recommendations about what they would like to see with that funding. And then agencies respond, hopefully most times, in a positive way to what Congress's recommendations are. If they don't, Congress has the power to bring in federal agency heads and ask them why they aren't doing what Congress has asked them to do, and really motivate them to adopt and make decisions that has congressional intent.
Thank you so much for that overview of that, Philip. And As you briefly mentioned some of the agencies such as CDC and NIH, can you just briefly talk about a few of these agencies that we discuss and just a little bit about them for people who may not be as familiar with what the CDC, NIH, and other agencies are?
Sure. So we work very closely with the National Institutes of Health. The National Institutes of Health is the premier medical research agency in our country. Over the past year, you might have seen a lot of Dr. Fauci on TV or heard Dr. Fauci's name. He's one of the directors at an institute at the National Institutes of Health. They support medical research. They're divided into different specialty institutes which cover different parts. We're very fortunate that Cecile is an advisory council member for the NIDDK Institute, which covers research on GI issues as well as digestive issues as well. So each institute has a specific role in supporting research. What they do is that basic science research. What's then critically important is the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is the public health organization for our government. They're tasked with making sure that information is being shared. Again, over the past year, you might hear different things about what CDC guidelines are, recommendations are in terms of how to deal with the pandemic. That's influenced by the science that's done at NIH, but NIH doesn't release these different types of guidelines or recommendations. That comes from the CDC. So the CDC is critically important because they take the important research and the science from NIH and they share that with the community. It's very important for us to work with them as well because it allows us to share recent breakthroughs and new discoveries on the basic science for our communities with medical professionals, with patient communities to better understand things and why we're very active in that chronic disease education and awareness program. The Food and Drug Administration, they're the ones who regulate therapies, approve treatments. So they have a very critical role as well, where they rely on the science that's done at NIH, and they work to a limited extent with CDC in terms of disseminating information. All three are critically important for us because FDA also has different guidelines that they release when it comes to therapies and other things that are important to our communities.
Thank you so much for that great overview of all these federal agencies. And of course, this is just three of the key ones we tend to work with. But all federal agencies are important in this process. And as different policies and priorities come forward, we tend to work with others. And really, the options are endless as far as what we can advocate on for the benefit of the patient community.
That's right. There are any number of other federal healthcare or federal agencies that we work with, such as the Department of Defense or the Department of Veterans Affairs, that have key decision-making and key programs that benefit our communities. But a lot of the work that we do is focused within HHS at NIH, CDC, and FDA. But there are any number of federal agencies that we work very closely with to advance the priorities of our communities.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for taking the time to share with us this important information about how Congress works. And for anyone who's just tuning in, you can watch this video and more at IFFGD's 2021 Virtual Advocacy Event page on iffgd.org. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Hi, and thank you for being here with us for IFFGD's 2021 Advocacy event. We appreciate you spending this evening or afternoon with us, learning a little bit more about advocacy, about Washington, how it works, and how you can make a difference in Washington. You just heard Philip talking with us about how Congress works, and it's always great to sort of have a refresher on that. I remember sort of taking that class in high school, but learned a lot when I started working in advocacy and realizing how much more I can do and how much my voice really does matter to my legislators. So I hope that you will continue with us this afternoon. Our next talk is with Marissa Lombardi, Program Coordinator here at IFFGD. One of our major projects is advocacy. And so I actually took some time to interview her for tonight's program about advocacy and why it matters. Marissa, actually, I met her through advocacy before she even began working for IFFGD, because she was an advocate for those with GI disorders for many, many, many years. And so this is something that is very passionate for her, something that she's done for a long time, and I think you're really going to enjoy hearing her opinions about advocacy and why it matters. Hello, and thank you for joining us today for the International Foundation for Gastrointestinal Disorders, or IFFGD's 2021 virtual advocacy event. Throughout today's program, we're going to focus on advocacy, ensuring that you as an advocate have all the tools and answers that you need to successfully contact Congress. And with us today to really sort of give us a nice base for that is IFFGD's program coordinator, Marissa Lombardi. She's going to discuss a little bit more about how Congress works and help you to understand how that affects you as a constituent or a citizen of the United States, and how you can work with your congressional members. Thank you for coming and joining us today, Marissa. Can we start maybe by you telling us, what does it mean to be an advocate?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be a part of this program and be able to help educate and inform advocates and those interested in advocating for their disease states or others. And to begin, an advocate really is just someone who is passionate about making a difference for the benefit of the larger community, for the benefit beyond themselves. And when someone mentions advocacy, typically they think of advocating to lawmakers, like people are during our virtual advocacy event this year. But advocacy really goes beyond that and begins closer to home. An advocate is someone who sees a need and seeks to fill that need. And often that begins with a personal type need, such as health-related support. And this begins with advocating with healthcare providers, when patients or caregivers really make a point to develop a good conversation with their healthcare team, their healthcare providers, and make sure that all their needs are met so that they can receive proper care and treatment. And while developing that proper care and treatment, often people realize that there are needs to be filled beyond that there is a stopping point in their current treatment or their current understanding, the research that has been done, or their education, which tends to tailor patients and caregivers and all community members to then seek to expand those resources. So that support and that need will extend beyond personal needs into advocating to Congress, as Congress is the one who really can help direct and encourage different government agencies and allot funds to ensure that there is current, up-to-date, and improved research, treatment options, and awareness and education available to patients, but also to the larger community, so that those who are impacted by GI illness are able to get the best education they can. But beyond that, many people who do have GI related symptoms may not realize it. So the general public needs to have that proper education so that they understand what the symptoms are, and so that they can be understanding and aware of what their loved ones are going through that are impacted by a chronic GI illness.
That's so true. That is the progression of advocacy, the breadth of what it covers is something that so many people don't understand. Thank you so much for explaining that so well to us today, Marissa. And as we discuss that sort of breadth of opportunities to advocate, maybe you can hone in and tell us a little bit about what are the key roles of an advocate?
Absolutely. And I will stress on the advocacy to lawmakers and to government agencies, as this is what this event entails and is really trying to educate people on, which in turn goes to the number one role of an advocate when they are talking to their representative or senators, is to educate. They're educating and informing their lawmakers, making them aware as constituents, as members that live in the state or district that is being represented by them. These advocates really let them know what is important close to home. So that way, when these lawmakers go to DC and they are in their committees, they are working in Congress, they are aware of what is most important. They are aware of what is impacting people close to home, of where education is needed, of what diseases are having a significant impact on the population, such as broad diseases like IBS or GERD, or more rare diseases such as SMAS or EOE, different conditions that you may be impacted by and may learn more about during this advocacy program, during our Sunday education series. And in addition to educating, as a part of that education to lawmakers, advocates raise awareness for those diseases I just mentioned. And the best way to do that is to share personal stories. Let your senator or representative know exactly what the impact is to you personally, or if you are advocating for someone you care for, or if you are speaking on behalf of a family member or loved one of your view outside of that GI illness. The personal story is one of the biggest roles of an advocate, because that makes all the legislative priorities that are important to you really hit close to home and make a significant impact to legislators. And of course, as I touched on a little bit earlier, improved education is something really important to stress to lawmakers, to let them know that any points that you needed education along your patient journey, any ways that you see a need being filled in your immediate community where education could benefit as a whole. All of these aspects of your knowledge, of your personal story and your experiences really help you to best be an advocate for whatever the topic or legislative priority is that you wish to advocate for.
Thank you so much for Marissa for that explanation. It's really is important that each person's story is heard. But you know, the thing that we hear a lot at IFFGD is why does my individual story, why is that so important? Why I'm one person. My story is probably like everyone else's. Why should I contact Congress? And why is one individual advocate so important? And how do I make an impact in Congress?
Absolutely. That's such a great question. And that stems back to the fact that you're a constituent of the representative or senator that you are talking to. And your voice is very important, as you are the individual that they are representing in Washington, D.C. And getting many voices together creates a critical mass of support. So as an advocate, especially one participating on behalf of an organization such as IFFGD or any other organization, you're part of an important coordinated nationwide grassroots effort. So that means there are many voices coming together at home, from their home states, from their home districts, speaking to their representatives. So even though you may feel that your voice is only one voice, there could be multiple people in your area impacted by that and speaking that as well. And there certainly are many people throughout the country. And our legislators talk to each other. They discuss with each other. So if your legislator brings up that they have heard your personal story about the need for step therapy, legislation reform, or about being impacted by a specific GI illness, and they're a part of a discussion where another legislator has heard that similar story, that engages and improves and increases that conversation. And that unified voice that advocates develop when working on a coordinated effort increases the weight of each other's voices throughout the country. So every person who contacts an office discussing GI needs will remind that congressional office of previous conversations they may have had with other advocates, or may improve, like I said, their discussion with other lawmakers, and just further show the importance and strengthen the needs of everyone advocating for GI illness.
Absolutely. So well said. Thank you, Marissa. Thank you for taking time to really explain to us very clearly the importance of the work that we're doing this week during our advocacy event. Here at IFFGD, we hold an annual advocacy event. It's always important that we continue the conversation, that we do share our individual stories, as Marissa has just explained to us how important that is to make change in the healthcare system in America. Thank you so much for taking that time to really talk with us about how advocacy matters. The rest of this evening's program is going to give you more information how to do exactly what Marissa just talked about. Talking with your legislators is not difficult, but there's a process and how to find out who to talk to. There's more information about how to do those types of things, and we will have more. And then in the beginning of the program, Marissa had touched on other types of advocacy, advocating for yourself, being there for yourself and making sure that you are advocating in your healthcare system and with your family and your friends. And this advocacy event does talk a lot about support resources for you in order to be able to do that. And so thank you for Marissa for talking about those things. And for those of you at home who want to learn more, please look at the entire agenda of our advocacy event for this week. We've got programs Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and hopefully you'll find something of interest or maybe all of it, whatever you want to watch. Please stay tuned and do that. If you missed something that you wish you had seen, it will be available on our IFFGD webpage in its entirety after the program. Please send us your questions. If you have any questions for Marissa about any of the things that she said, or for IFFGD as a whole, advocacy or not, maybe just a GI related question, please contact us. There are several ways that you can do that. If it's regarding advocacy, the most convenient way to do that is to email us at advocacy@iffgd.org. Or if it's a general question, or if you forget to say advocacy, it's very easy. You can always email iffgd@iffgd.org. And that is our general email box. And we will be able to get back to you with any questions that you have about the program, about life, about advocating for yourself, about others, and try to help you navigate this journey that you are on, that we share with you, and want to be a resource for you. Thank you so much for participating in today's advocacy event for 2021. We hope that you enjoyed tonight's programming and that you will join us again, and that you will join us in contacting our congressional offices so that you can be one of those voices that start that conversation that Marissa was talking about, that really get that dialogue going so that we can see real, true change in America in some of these areas that are patient access issues for those of us with GI illness. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that you'll continue watching tonight's program and join us again tomorrow. Hello and welcome back. This is IFFGD's 2021 Virtual Advocacy Event. My name is Cecile Rooker, and I'm the President and Executive Director for IFFGD. You just heard from Marissa Lombardi about advocacy and why it matters. If you're looking at the agenda, the next talk is how to contact your congressional office. If you were here earlier, though, you'll realize that we had a little technical difficulties, a little mix up with our videos, and we actually already showed that one. If you were not here for that one, don't worry. It will be on our website tomorrow, and you'll be able to catch it then. We'll be sending around links to all participants at the end of the programming on Tuesday. Or you can check out our YouTube channel, which is IFFGD. All the videos will be made live the day after they have premiered for this advocacy event. So we're going to go ahead and start talking about legislative priorities of IFFGD. As I'm sure you're aware, there's a lot going on in Washington. The congressional offices are dealing with bills on everything from health and health-related issues to oil prices and trade, commerce, defense. There are a lot of bills out there. There's a lot of people who are advocating on their own behalf for different reasons. And if you're like me, you probably advocate for different things as well. However, when we go to the Hill, to really specifically talk about gastrointestinal disorders. We need to hone in on exactly those disorders and talk about what bills we have that are interesting us as the GI illness community. So IFFGD spends a lot of time looking to see what the issues are, and we develop a legislative priorities list every year, which changes throughout the year as new things come up or if a bill gets passed. And so Marissa Lombardi is actually interviewing me in this next video to talk about what IFFGD's legislative priorities are for 2021. That doesn't mean that they have to be your priorities. When you talk to your congressional offices, you need to talk about what's important to you. There is also many things on our legislative priority list, and you don't have to be in support of all of them. You need to figure out what you find to be your priorities. But if you don't have time to research it all, that's why we've created this video, so you can get an overview of some of the priorities that we think are important for the community. If you have questions about any of these, we'd be happy to talk to you in more detail about any one of them so that you can feel comfortable in understanding what they are. And then you can feel comfortable going to the congressional offices and talking about them. So listen to this video. If you have questions, email us at advocacy@iffgd.org, and then we'll be back.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today at IFFGD's 2021 Virtual Advocacy event. Today, we are focusing on advocacy, ensuring that advocates have all the tools and answers they need to successfully contact Congress. And with us today is IFFGD's President, Cecile Rooker, to discuss more about IFFGD's legislative priorities.
Thank you for having me here today, Marissa. I really appreciate this opportunity to be able to share these important issues with the patient population.
And can you begin by telling us the main areas of IFFGD's legislative priority focus?
Absolutely. So IFFGD has a pretty broad advocacy and legislative agenda. However, we do try to hone in on a couple very specific points. One is patient access to treatment, which is very important for those of us that are struggling with our diseases. Also, medical research in the area of gastrointestinal illness. That's also extremely important to us. And of course, raising awareness about GI disorders with the public as well as in legislative offices.
Wonderful. That's so great to let people know what a broad reach that our legislative priorities have for the GI community. And can you begin going into more detail about them by discussing some of these key medical research priorities, beginning with the NIH?
Absolutely. So the National Institutes of Health, as you know, is an institute that was developed by our government here in the U.S. in order to broaden education and understanding through research. It has many, many institutes, and there are a few that specifically deal with gastrointestinal disorders, and then there's some that just sort of orthogonally assist with patients with GI disorders. So as a whole, we are advocating that the National Institutes of Health get a $46.1 billion in funding for fiscal year 2022. That would be a $3.2 billion increase over 2021, the current year that we're in. But this would allow us to strengthen our biomedical research through the NIH in order to sustain some new innovations, have some groundbreaking new research opportunities. And in the wake of this pandemic, maybe allow us to learn a little bit more about how the COVID is going to affect people, especially with gastrointestinal illnesses or those who didn't before but now do. And so we are really hoping that Congress and the President will support us in this $3.2 billion increase for the National Institutes of Health as a whole. We also very specifically ask for an increase proportional to the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases. This is called the NIDDK. The NIDDK holds the largest portfolio of gastrointestinal research at the NIH. And therefore, as we ask Congress to increase funding for NIH as a whole, we are asking them to proportionally increase for NIDDK as well, because NIDDK does support basic clinical translational research for those of us suffering with gastrointestinal disorders.
Thank you so much. And can you also tell viewers a little bit more about our legislative priorities that are relevant to the Department of Defense and Department of Veterans Affairs?
Absolutely. So the military is really important to our country. And what so many people don't understand is that approximately 25 to 32% of all Gulf War veterans continue to experience symptoms associated with deployment. Many of these symptoms are related to their GI tract. So many have GERD, irritable bowel syndrome, some nausea and vomiting, a lot of pain, different types of disorders. And those are things that we're trying to understand. We're trying to understand how it is that these veterans come back from deployment with an unexplained illness. Sometimes people call this Gulf War illness. Some people call it medically explained illnesses of the Gulf War. Either way, there are portfolios of research in both the DoD, the Department of Defense, and the VA, the Department of Veterans Affairs, that are seeking to get a better understanding of what is causing these disorders and also how to treat them. And so therefore, in the wake of all that we've got going on in this country, I really feel that it is important that we do advocate to Congress to continue to support these research programs, and not only continue to support these research programs, but increase them as they can so that we can have more funding behind some very important topics for our military service members. And this actually goes for not just veterans, but people that are in service today. Research is showing us that not just deployed veterans are coming back with GI illnesses that are unexplained, but also people that serve right here in our nation. And how can we figure out how to make them better without research? And so we really do advocate, and we plead with Congress to please increase these research portfolios and ensure that our military service members are able to get better when they have finished their service to our country. We will have a program later this week that really focuses on VA and DoD and some of the research that they're doing, and specifically about functional GI disorders and the military service member. I personally have interviewed Mark Riddle for another segment during this advocacy event, and it'll be coming later on in the week. Please tune in for that. And if you miss any of our programs, of course, we have all our online resources at home. But there are many things that you can learn about what the VA is doing, their research portfolios, and then also what can you as a patient do to try to find help if you're suffering from one of these disorders.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And of course, in addition to looking forward to the programs later this week that will touch on the VA, DoD, and resources and research, those that are impacted by Gulf War illness or other medically unexplained illnesses of veterans and military service members, or anyone who would like to learn more, can also take a look at our fact sheet number 440 on functional GI disorders in the military service member that is available in IFFGD's publication library.
Very true.
And can you next touch on some of the key patient access to treatment discussion points that advocates can discuss with their congressional offices, and even just learn that are IFFGD's key priorities?
Absolutely. So patient access to treatment has been a very cornerstone of IFFGD's advocacy for many years. And as we are in our 30th year as an organization, we continue to raise that flag on behalf of patients everywhere. Patient access to treatment is a really broad category, Marissa. And so there are several different buckets in which this can fall into, and there are many ways that people are affected by different policies and procedures that make them not be able to get the diagnostic testing they need, or the treatment options that they need. And so what we are trying to do is to really hone in on some of these key legislative priorities, especially those that are already have legislation built around them that have momentum in the congressional offices. And we try to join with that momentum in order to try to help move the needle forward. And so some of these, just to give you just really brief top line examples, are things like non-medical switching. So non-medical switching happens when you as a patient are working with your physician or your healthcare provider and you've decided a treatment plan for you and it's working and things are going well. And then your insurance company comes back and says, actually, we want you to be on a different medication. Now, this new medication may have an endpoint, as they call it in pharmaceuticals. Endpoint means this is what it's designed to treat. So it may just be designed to treat the exact same thing. For example, I suffer from a very slow GI motility tract, dysmotility in my GI system, and therefore I suffer from constipation quite often. Not very long ago, I was on one drug and it was working for me. And as you know, as in leadership of Iffgd, I did a lot of traveling, and with travel often comes more constipation. But I was okay because this medicine really, really helped me. And then I was asked to switch to a different medication, one that did not work well for me. And so therefore it disrupted my life. It caused me to have to go backwards in my treatment plan, excuse me, my treatment plan, in order to try to have relief from my symptoms. This sort of switching happens with no consultation with the physician or the patient themselves and can cause a lot of harm for patients that are finally getting their lives back and able to progress despite their chronic illness. So that is one. Another one with that is very similar is when you have step therapy. So step therapy is when an insurance company tells a patient, your doctor says that you should have a certain drug, like this is what you should be taking. But the pharmaceutical company, or actually pharmacy benefit manager who controls this program, comes through and says, in order to get to that drug, we want to make sure that nothing else works for you, none of the cheaper options. And so therefore, you as a patient might be required to do some of the over-the-counter medications that you've already tried, because so many of us suffer for so long before we even pick up the phone and call our doctor. And then we call our doctor, and our doctor starts us with a lot of these simple, maybe dietary changes, maybe an over-the-counter medication, and we try those and they don't work. And then finally, you get to the prescription medications and some stronger prescription medications, or maybe if you have something like Crohn's or colitis, they may put you on what's called a biologic to help to control your disease. With step therapy, they say, well, yes, the biologic is what your physician has asked you to take and thinks through his medical knowledge and his expertise that is what you need. But before we're going to allow you to do that, we want you to try these other treatments first. Now, what this does is it slows down your progress. In some cases, with some patients, it could be life-threatening, and it could cause more damage to the body while you're trying to go through these steps that have been put in your way. Step therapy is an issue that has been on the table in Congress for many years, and there is a bill. It is the a Step Therapy Act that has been introduced into Congress in this congressional session. As a matter of fact, it was just introduced in February. And so Iffgd is very much advocating that Congress pass this piece of legislation. This legislation would allow patients and their providers to be able to appeal a step therapy process imposed by their insurance in a very quick way, so that there would be a quick turnaround, so that the risks of not taking the medication that's prescribed to you will be easier to navigate through quicker, so that you can get to what you need. We are hoping to have this introduced in the House of Representatives soon, and maybe by this event in late March it will be. But if it's not, we really urge all of the watchers out there, when you call your congressional offices, that one, you ask your senators to support S464 which was introduced by Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. And if it's a House of Representatives congressional member that you're speaking to, that you ask them to consider helping to introduce the act, or please sign on to it when it is introduced. And we are confident that this bill will be introduced during this congressional session. And we really hope that this is the congressional session, this is the year that we'll be able to get this bill passed. We also have a couple other issues that patients face in the area of patient access, and one of those is in regards to like medical foods and dietary treatments. What we find here at IFFGD is so many people really and truly want to know more about how food and diet can affect their lives, and how they might be able to figure out how food is contributing to the severity of their symptoms. And many people know, you know your bodies, you know that if you eat certain things, it causes a flare or an episode in your body. And you want to be able to learn more about that. And you want to be able to go to a dietitian and work with them, like you, as part of your healthcare team. And there is some legislation that is we are working on, and there is that helps to urge Congress to allow for reimbursement to dietitian. This is called the Medical Nutrition Therapy Act. And this act, once it's introduced and passed, will require that dietitians be a part of that healthcare team that is reimbursable by insurance companies. Therefore, you don't have to pay out of pocket for the services. And there are many dietitians that specialize in GI disorders. IFFGD is very proud to have a listing on our website, our dietitian listing, of dietitians around the world who are committed to working with patients with GI illness. And these trained professionals know about many different GI diseases, what are the best nutrition therapy for them, and can help to tailor a diet for each individual person as an individual. And this act will really help to allow patients access to that type of treatment in a way they didn't have before, because financially it's very expensive to keep going to these different specialists.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for giving us such a detailed overview of the importance of these legislative priorities. And many patients and caregivers and anyone watching this can likely relate to one or more of those patient access to treatments priorities that we advocate for. And of course, as you said, please advocate to your senators about the Safe Step Act, S464, and to your House of Representatives about looking for that legislation that will hopefully be coming out soon in this Congress, so that we can get that legislation passed, as it has been gaining support over the years that it has been introduced. And we really hope to get some movement on that to really make a significant change for patients.
Absolutely.
And now that we've discussed our patient access to treatment priorities, can you tell us a little bit more about our legislative asks regarding education and awareness of GI conditions?
Absolutely. So education and awareness are really important to the GI population. One is there's so many people that just don't know enough about their disease states. The general public doesn't know enough, and there needs to be more awareness brought out about the sufferings and the things that we live with each day as patients with GI illness. And so IFFGD is actually advocating for a program at the CDC for chronic diseases education and awareness program. Now, the CDC is a governmental agency that focuses on surveillance, providing education, and public awareness. And this is in order to increase diagnoses and to improve patient outcomes, especially for those with chronic GI illness. And so what we're asking for is $5 million for this program in 2022. This would allow the CDC to expand its portfolio of disease states that it covers. The CDC has a very deep portfolio of quite a few chronic diseases that it already has a lot of programs for, but it is lacking the funds to expand that portfolio. So while they would really love to add more chronic conditions to the areas that it raises awareness about and educates people about, they need funding to do that. And in order to do that, Congress needs to add that into the appropriations funding bill and package that they passed for 2022. We have joined with other organizations and are asking for $5 million for this program.
Thank you so much. It's great to know that the CDC has wonderful programs in order to help raise awareness and education, as you said, to even the general public, for people who may not be directly impacted by GI disorders, or maybe they are but don't know yet because they don't have the education to really be aware of their symptoms and the impact of them. Mm-hmm. And as we discussed through all of these legislative priorities, that there's many aspects relevant to the GI community. And one thing we especially touched on, as you discussed step therapy and medical nutrition, is that these priorities may change, that legislation may be introduced. So can IFFGD's legislative priorities change at all throughout the year in this 117th session of Congress?
Absolutely. Marissa, things are always changing, as we know, even in 2020, right? How no one anticipated that COVID would be upon us in March. In this time last year, and everything changed, right? So things are often happening very quickly. On the Hill, new legislation is being introduced. Maybe one bill gets passed, which then raises maybe an idea or a need for something else. And as needs come up and as things happen, as they do so quickly, IFFGD stays on top of all of the issues. And anytime we are informed about something that is affecting our community here at IFFGD, we take a long, hard look at it. And often mid-year, we'll add items to our legislative priorities, especially if a new bill is introduced that will directly affect our patient population. And so as this happens, we will try to keep everyone updated. We have a newsletter, which is the Advocacy Connection. And in this newsletter, we do inform people of what is going on in Congress. What's new and happening? Are there new bills being introduced? Are there new issues that need to be addressed? And oftentimes that does happen mid-year. And so while we have set our priorities for 2021, that doesn't mean that they're going to remain that way. Maybe mid-year we change our priorities, or we shift a little bit, or we add an additional priority. This is all just part of working in the field of advocacy. And we want to try to keep people at home informed of these as well. So please stay tuned with IFFGD to learn more about any new priorities that may come up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And as she said, the IFFGD Advocacy Connection is a way to stay on top of any changes in legislative priorities and issues and new news related to advocacy. So if you would like to join that newsletter, or if you have any other questions regarding the legislative priorities or advocacy at all, you can please email advocacy@iffgd.org, or you can also call us at 414-946-1799. And this can be with any questions regarding advocacy, any concerns, anything we can assist you with during your advocacy efforts, or if you have other questions as well. And thank you so much, Cecile, for taking the time to share with us this important information about IFFGD's 2021 legislative priorities and what they all mean and the significance of each aspect. And for those watching, you can watch more of IFFGD's virtual advocacy event program on our webpage. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello and welcome back to IFFGD's 2021 Advocacy event. Thank you for joining us with us this evening as we talk about advocating for yourself and others in Washington. As you know, this is a week-long event, and we had educational programming yesterday about advocating for yourself and finding support services, whether that be a support group or other type of support service. Today we're talking about advocating for yourself in Washington, and tomorrow we're going to talk about actually Veterans Administration, what they're doing, what research they have going on, and also what services they provide for patients with gastrointestinal illness. Please mark your calendars to join us tomorrow. But all week long, we're asking you to contact your congressman and congresswomen to discuss the legislative priorities that are important to you. And we are trying to give you as many resources as we can to make that as easy and effortless as possible so that you can advocate on behalf of yourself or a loved one and ensure that your congressional representative knows what's important to you. I hope you enjoyed hearing about the different legislative priorities that Iffgd has sort of come through and pulled out as our set of priorities. And when I go to Washington, that's what I talk about when I talk about the GI community as a whole. I talk about those priorities that were discussed in the previous video. Now, as you may have seen in the chat, we had a question from Brittany. And so I want to address that question. I apologize, Brittany, that I completely forgot about it before the last video. But your question was that you really aren't comfortable talking about your illness experience, your journey. Can you just mention it? Of course. Of course. Your illness journey is your personal experience. Your advocacy is your personal journey. And you share whatever you're comfortable with or nothing at all. Saying that you are Brittany and you are from their district or that you're just calling on behalf of the gastrointestinal illness community is really all you have to say. You say what's comfortable to you. You talk about what you want to talk about the priorities that are important to you. Remember that advocacy is a personal journey. No one can tell you how to feel, just like no one can tell you what your true symptoms are or what you're going through on a day-to-day basis. Your illness experience is your very own. Your advocacy journey is your own as well. So Brittany, no, do what is comfortable for you and know that just your presence, just telling them, hey, here are the papers, as you all know, Iffgd, or maybe you don't, Iffgd does have our legislative priorities ready for download on our website. You'll also be sent a link to these papers in the chat box. And what this is going to do is allow you to just print those out or email them to your congressional office and say, these are the priorities of the gastrointestinal illness community. I'm your constituent and I really want you to look these over. You don't have to say any more than that. Or if you want to, please do share your story. They want to hear your story if you want to share it. But they certainly don't want you to share something that you're not comfortable with. So I hope that answers your question, Brittany. I think we have a few other questions, and I'm pretty sure that we had one or two that got emailed in to our advocacy at iffgd.org email box. And we will be answering those with Philip during our live Q&A. But before we get to our live Q&A with Philip, we have one final video for you, and that is how to follow up. So this week we're asking you to contact your congressman, and we want you to do that. We want you to email, call, tweet, whatever you're going to do, and that is fantastic. But following up really is the key. Our founder, Nancy Norton, used to say quite often, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and you've probably heard that. There is nowhere that it is more true than in Washington, D.C. And so, making the call is fantastic. Following that up with an email is even better. Letting us know at Iffgd that you've done it so that we can also follow up with an email, well, that's just the tops. So, Philip is going to tell you a little bit more about how to follow up after your call and what steps to take afterwards to make sure that you make a lasting impact from that contact with your congressional office. And then we will come back here for some live Q&A with Philip. We've got some great questions, and if you have more, please send them in the chat box, email us, let us know what your questions are, and we'll try to answer them while Philip is live with us on the phone. Hello, and thank you for joining us today for Iffgd's 2021 Virtual Advocacy event. Today, we are focusing on advocacy, ensuring that advocates have all the tools and answers that they need to successfully contact Congress. With us today is IFFGD's Washington representative, Philip Goglis II. He is here to discuss more about how to follow up with Congress. Thank you for being here with us today, Philip.
Thank you, Cecile. It's great to be here with you, and thank you all for advocating on behalf of our communities. Your participation is critically important, and it really does make a difference with members of Congress. And if you need more information about how to contact your member of Congress or some more information, please feel free to review some of the previous videos.
That's right. For those of you at home, we have had the pleasure of interviewing Mr. Goglis several times today. And so you'll have quite a few videos that gives you step-by-step instructions on how to contact your congressional members. This video, however, talks about afterwards, the next step. So Philip, let's say that someone has already done that. Now what do they do? What's the next steps that should happen after they follow the steps from those previous interviews?
Right. So one of the first things we're going to ask you to do is let us know who you spoke with. Let IFFGD know who you contacted. If you were able to speak with somebody, who did you speak with? If you emailed somebody, who did you email? And we're going to ask you to do that by sending us a follow-up note at advocacy@iffgd.org or giving us a call at 414-946-1799.
Fantastic. So following up with IFFGD is really, really important. But let me get a little more granular with you here, Philip. So when they do follow up with us, what information exactly should they share with IFFGD to help us continue that advocacy effort?
So what's going to be important for us is the who, what, where, when, why, how. So letting us know, who did you contact? How did it go? Were you able to connect with your a staffer for one of your or both of your senators? Did they have positive things to say? Did they take the time to meet with you? What questions did they have? Do we need to send any follow-up information? Did they ask some specific things that you didn't know the answer to, which is perfectly okay, that we should follow up with? Were they receptive? Did they make note of anything that you think is of importance? All that is important for us to know, so that way we're able to follow up with them on key aspects of your conversation. We also would like to know, what email did you use? What phone number did you contact? That way we can make sure that there is that follow-up with you after your conversation with them.
Awesome. So that's a lot of information. Why is it important that you share all of this information with IFFGD?
So it's critically important because it helps us continue our efforts. We don't ask our advocates to be experts on policy or process. We ask you to be the expert in your story. My role here in Washington is to be that expert in policy and process, to follow up with offices, to let them know how they can be helpful and what they can do, and to have those in-depth policy conversations. So by you sharing all of this, it gives me the ability to follow up with an office and say, Cecile, thanks for taking the time to speak with members of our community. I know you had some questions about some of our specific priorities, and now that gives me the opportunity to share more in-depth answers with them and to work with them to get their office to support our priorities. It also allows us to work on developing that relationship as well and following up with your initial contact with them and helping you to solidify your relationship with your two senators and with your House member.
Fantastic. And talking about building that relationship, Philip, should advocates follow up with the staff member again, even though IFFGD is going to do it?
Yes. So what's critically important, as we discussed in one of the previous videos, there are 435 members of the House and 100 members of the Senate. I could go to every single House office and every single Senate office. I could visit 535 offices. One thing that they will always ask me is, do I have a constituent who would benefit from these policies that you came to me to speak about? So that's where you come in. And that's why it's critically important for you to develop that relationship, so that way you can follow up with them throughout the year. There are going to be a number of different issues that come up during a congressional term, And we are going to ask you to, again, follow up with your members. We also talked about different important committees that are in the House and the Senate. And if your member is on one of those committees, we absolutely want to be able to check in with them throughout the year when it comes to anything from patient access issues to funding recommendations that happen throughout the year, or just to keep them updated on some of the activities that IFFGD is doing as an organization or as a community.
Sounds fantastic. Thank you, Philip, for helping us understand sort of those next steps. A lot of times during these advocacy events, it's an event and everyone gets excited. We sometimes forget that there's follow-up, and then there's a relationship to build. I know one of our advocates named Debbie last year built a great relationship with her congressional representative to the point that he sort of looked to her when she would come in to ask questions about some of the bills and some of the issues that were facing the GI illness community. And she was able to use that relationship to help get several signatures on bills for that benefits all of us. So that is really important, and it's really crucial that we do that. And thank you for taking time this afternoon to be able to sort of discuss that with us. As all of you know, there will be, hopefully, there will be a live question and answer session at the end of our advocacy programming today. Mr. Douglas has agreed to come online and to be able to answer questions that you have. So make sure that you're sending those in on the chat feature, and so that we can store those away for the end of the program. Please continue to watch our program on Advocacy Today. We're trying to explain to you all things advocacy. And if you're just joining us and you missed some of those videos that we talked about that have already happened earlier in the programming, have no fear, they're going to be on our website. So you can go to iffgd.org, and there will be an advocacy event program page. And on that page, you'll find all of the videos that we've already been through, including this one, and the ones that we'll be doing later on this evening as well. So please stay tuned for the rest of the videos, the live question and answer. And if you missed anything, you can always go back and watch it again. Thank you for joining us today for our program in What's the Next Step in Advocacy following your contact with your congressional office. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Hello and welcome back. We hope that you've enjoyed this evening's program on advocating for yourself in Washington, day 2 of IFFGD's 2021 virtual advocacy event. So we've had a lot of wonderful programming here tonight. We've given you a lot of great information. Please remember that all of these videos will be available online. All of the legislative priorities, information about all of these bills, the appropriations or budgetary requests, all of that stuff is available online at iffgd.org. And if you have any questions, feel free to email us at advocacy@iffgd.org. Right now, we have Philip Douglas on the line. Philip, thank you for joining us by phone for this question and answer time.
Hi, Cecile. Good evening or afternoon, depending on where you are. And thank you for joining us. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Philip. Yes, so those of you at home, we have got Philip here, and many of you know him. He's the Washington representative for IFFGD, and he helps us with all things Washington. So, Philip, I've got a couple questions for you from the audience, and let me start with the first question. So the first question says, the viewer wants to know, if there are so many different agencies or offices that are involved in the laws that are being made, why do we only reach out to the House and Senate offices?
Thanks, Cecile. That's a great question. The reason why we engage with the House and the Senate instead of other agencies first is because Congress is charged with creating specific policy recommendations that get implemented. They get passed through the House and the Senate, signed by the president, who, through his or her administration, executes the rollout and function of those policies and laws that are passed. Congress also decides how much money is funded each year for each federal agency. So while we do have good relationships with federal agencies such as the National Institutes of Health, and we do have the ability to go to them and ask them to support specific priorities, they're only able to do that when Congress provides the funding for that. So we every year have to go to the House and the Senate, ask them to support, a specific funding level for the National Institutes of Health, to support specific recommendations, because they have the unique responsibility of funding these federal agencies, creating specific policies, and then a responsibility of oversight over these agencies to make sure that they're doing what Congress has asked them to do and that they're delivering for their constituents, which are the people.
Absolutely. And remember that it is you as the constituent that is that keeps them their feet held to the fire, as Philip likes to say to me, and making
Absolutely.
sure that they that they're doing what they say they're going to do. So the
right.
next
Members of Congress are the ones who are most responsible to the American people. Different agency heads and others, they serve at the pleasure of either the president and their administration, or in some areas, with the support and consent of Congress. So members of the House and Senate are directly responsible to all of you as their constituents. So that's why we engage with them, because they like to, need to, and want to hear from their constituents about what key priorities they have.
Absolutely. So our next question, Philip, comes from one of our attendees, and their comment is that their story is just extremely long. And because we have such short calls with our congressional offices, they want to know how they can get their story to them without rushing through it over the phone.
Another great question. What I recommend is
Uh-oh.
Can you hear me?
I'm afraid you broke up there just for a second. Philip, can you start at the beginning and let's do that again?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I said that's a great question. And what I would recommend is developing an elevator pitch. And imagine that you are in your local grocery store or in your post office, and you just happen to bump into your member of Congress. You don't have a lot of time to share with them, but if you have a few seconds, what are the key things that you want them to know about your journey, about your experience, and what they should be doing to help you and make your life better? There are different ways to follow up with your full story. That's through email or through follow-up conversations with the office and developing those relationships. But we encourage folks to pick out, and I believe it's in one of the videos where we go over how to create your story. What has changed in your life? What has your journey been? Try to keep it concise, and then there is an opportunity through follow-up, whether it's an email or subsequent conversations, to get the office or the member to hear your full story and to truly understand why it's important that they support our priorities.
Absolutely. So we do like to see this as developing a relationship with your congressional offices and getting to know them, as Amber had mentioned in the chat earlier, really developing sort of a relationship with someone. And so over time, they will probably learn more and more about your story, because they do want to know. But the elevator speech, that's a great way to put that, Philip. So I do have one more question. We have a viewer that wants to know if they have to discuss all of IFFGD's legislative priorities when they have this conversation with their congressional offices.
So the short answer to that is no, but I'll elaborate a little more on that. So in our materials, we have crafted all of the information that's there, that's useful to the offices. But what's most important is you sharing your story. And then critically, after you speak or connect with your office, is to follow up with IFFGD to let us know who you spoke with, how was the conversation, who did you email, what response did you get back? Because my job here in Washington is to follow up on your behalf. So if you tell me, I live in Orlando and I had a call with Senator Rubio's staffer from Orlando and his name is Bob, and I was able to share my story, but I didn't get a chance to hit all of the priorities but you let us know that, I can then go and follow up with Senator Rubio's office and say, I know that there was a constituent of yours who spoke with Bob in your Orlando office. I just want to close the loop on what our priorities are and follow up on your behalf. So the most important thing is to share your story. All of the other aspects, that's what I'm here for, Cecile is for, Marissa is here for. We'll handle that follow-up and some of those specifics, but you truly are the expert in your story. Don't worry about the policy side. That's my job, and that's what I take care of for folks.
Absolutely. And, you know, if you do have one of the priorities, like we had a viewer today talk about step therapy and how that is very important to them, and another that mentioned the Medical Nutrition Therapy Act, that's very important to them. Do feel free, if you have certain of the legislative priorities that are very, very important to you, make sure that you do bring those up on the call. And then we'll send the entire packet to the Congressional office that sort of details everything, but let them know what is specifically important to you. Your advocacy journey is your own, and make sure that your Congressional office knows that you have a lot of things that are important to the community, but these are things that are really, really hitting home for you and really a burden for you personally. They want to know those things. And okay, so Philip, we are down to, I think, the last question. And the last question says, so what should I do if I don't hear back from the office I talked to after this event?
Another very timely and appropriate question. Since we are still in the midst of the pandemic, and I know, a lot of folks it's been Groundhog Day for over a year now. There are a lot of staffers who still are working remotely, and they receive a lot of emails and a lot of phone calls. There are staffers who I know really well, who I'm friends with, that it takes them a little bit to get back in touch with me. So, my advice is pack your patience. They will get back to you. It is appropriate to follow up with them, but I do know that sometimes it may take folks a week or two to get back to you and to reply to your message. But don't lose hope. If you have reached out to your member's office, they will reach back out to you. If you're at a point where you haven't received any feedback, please reach out to us and let us know. Provide us with some of the information, and we'll do some of the follow-up on your behalf to get that information back to you. But just be prepared that it may take a little while. But I can't stress enough to keep IFFGD, keep us in the loop on how everything has gone and what's going on in the future, so that way whatever follow-up needs to be done, we can go ahead and do that.
Absolutely. And let us know when you contact your Congressional offices. Like we keep saying, I'm going to say it again, let us know, because we will definitely be that squeaky wheel getting the grease if we are able to, all of us, follow up. But staffers are working remotely, and there's a lot going on in the midst of appropriations and other things happening in the Senate and the House right now. And so they're really busy, and we want to follow up with them gently but consistently. And so let us know if you need any help at all with that. Also, before we close this evening, I do want to remind you that IFFGD is your resource for advocacy. And if you are having issues contacting an office, if you're having issues finding the right office that you should be calling, or what email to email, reach out to us here at IFFGD. The email address is advocacy@iffgd.org. We'd be happy to sort of walk you through that, maybe find some of that information out for you and help you to connect with these Congressional offices. Happy to do that for you. You just have to let us know. So please feel free to email us at advocacy@iffgd.org. One of the questions that we didn't get today that, I think is something that I've heard before, Philip, so I'm going to ask it on behalf of people that I've had ask this from me is, oh, I missed IFFGD's advocacy event. I guess I have to wait till next year. Is that true, Philip?
That is absolutely not true. Advocacy is more than just one day or 1 week out of the year. Advocacy is every day of the entire year. So it's never a bad time to reach out to your member of Congress, to connect with them, to develop a relationship. we like to do everything in a concentrated effort, this week, but that doesn't mean that you are unable to participate or be active in advocacy. We have the resources, and I will always be in favor and encourage folks to reach out to their Senate members and their House members. So never prevent yourself from advocating because you miss a specific day or week. Let us know, and we're happy to work with you and provide you with the tools that you need to be successful.
Absolutely. And, I honestly just a couple weeks ago participated in the advocacy event for the Digestive Disease National Coalition. And there was a gentleman that was on my Team South Carolina, who has severe acute recurrent pancreatitis. And unfortunately was in the middle of an acute attack during our advocacy day, and so was unable to make the calls that we were making through Teams to our congressional offices. But that's okay, because he can do them later. You don't have to call on a specific day. Or let's say that someone forwarded you a link to this program and it's the summertime. Contact us at IFFGD, and we would be happy to help work with you to contact your congressional offices any time of the year. With chronic illness, you just never know how you're going to feel from one day to the next. Sometimes it's a struggle to do things that other people can just stand up and do, and we understand that because most of us here live through it too. So just remember, whenever you are ready, whenever you want to work with your congressional offices, reach out. It's never a bad time. It's never too early. It's never too late. It's always a good day to advocate for yourself. And whether that be picking up that phone or sending an email to a congressional office, or even just doing a Google search to find the support group that we talked about yesterday, it's always a good time to find a way to advocate for yourself. And that's what we're talking about this week. We're trying to help you get resources to be able to advocate for yourself. And I hope that you will take this to heart and that you will find some ways that you would be able to do that moving forward. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about the Veterans Administration and some of the things that they offer us in the gastrointestinal illness community, and also not just for our veterans and our military personnel, but for all of us in the GI illness community. Hope you will join us tomorrow night, 5:30 Eastern Standard Time. It'll be the same link that you're using today for this broadcast. Philip, thank you so much for joining us for this live Q&A and for all of those videos that you've pre-recorded for us over the last month or so. Appreciate all the work that you do on behalf of the gastrointestinal illness community.
Thank you, Cecile, and thank you to everybody who is advocating. You really are making a huge difference in the work that we're doing here in Washington. You're giving a voice to the patient community. You're using your voice to elevate the community, to educate lawmakers, and to make meaningful change. So thank all of you for your participation, and keep going strong.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. Thank you for joining us this evening. Let us know if you have any questions or need any help with contacting your congressional offices. Thank you, and we hope we'll see you tomorrow.